Now, when a new game in a long-running franchise is the one that will put the series to new heights and attract more eyes, it comes across as very successful, even if it does make some changes that will receive some pushback, especially from some veterans, despite it still being very well received. And that is what brings us to Tales of Arise, as it's actually been 4 years since that game has come out. Yep, my bones are feeling dusty, and pretty much, as you guys know, it has shaped my channel and changed my whole life, from its very first trailer that actually helped me go into the franchise, to covering it to its very release, which again helped grow this channel tremendously. And this was essentially a brand new mainline Tales game that showed promise with things like impressive graphics, fast-paced combat, and an intriguing story, and had a lot of strong promotion and marketing. Even had famed violinist Lindsey Sterling providing an amazing cover for the game's battle theme. When it was released initially, it had high praise, with it sitting at an 87 on Metacritic and won various awards, like Best RPG from the Game Awards. And currently, it's sold the best out of the entire series, with sitting at a lifetime of 3 million units since 2024, and likely garnered new fans. And even around in 2023, it also received an expansion DLC. However, over time, this game got lots of various amounts of criticism and hate, as well as discourse online, mostly from some veteran fans just not happy about the direction it took. Mostly it comes from the changes it made to series staples, or even how the story was actually told. It's similar to cases to other games like Final Fantasy XVI, Kingdom Hearts 3, Sonic Frontiers, and Fire Emblem Three Houses. But does it really deserve all that pushback? Or is it still an amazing game regardless? Hey everyone, what up? Matt Kaiser here, and welcome back as we dive back into Tales of Arise 4 years later. The development history. Now, Tales of Arise actually began development around the second half of 2016, just after Tales of Berseria was finished. And after initial Tales producer Hideo Baba left the series around in 2017, Yusuke Tomizawa would take over as general producer. And just like in my Scarlet Nexus retrospective, there was also a massive restructuring with the Tales division, with one of them being led by Kenji Nabuki and approximately about 35 other Tales devs to make a brand new IP, which of course became Scarlet Nexus. And while the remainder comprised of current Tales developers, even some of them that worked on the very first Tales game, that being Tales of Fantasia, as well as brand new devs to the Tales series entirely. And this would work to become the brand new mainline Tales game, which would set to evolve the Tales series, which of course became Arise. Now, Tales of Arise was directed by Hiroku Kagurazawa. I apologize for butchering that. And he was involved in past Tales games like Battle Programmer for Tales of Graces F, as well as assistant to Tales of Exilia, and was of course produced by Yusuke Tomizawa, who, as mentioned before, is the current producer of the Tales series. Now, initially, Arise, just like with Scarlet Nexus, was actually going to be its very own new IP, at least very early on in its development. However, according to both the director and producer, the game was going to be so different from anything that the Tales series was going to be that both executives were unsure about how it would feel if they should even use the familiar moniker. But they decided to choose to release it as a Tales game and revamp it to not only fit as a Tales game, but also use it to evolve the series going forward, with the code name being Arise. This game would fundamentally use Epic Games' Unreal Engine 4, ditching the in-house engine that past Tales games used, especially since from Tales of Exilia, and upwards would use. And this new engine would also be used in various other Bandai Namco properties, including things like the aforementioned Scarlet Nexus, among other famous JRPGs and games at the time, especially exemplified with both this game's stories and themes to the team's wishes. This allowed for much higher graphical quality compared to the other earlier entries. The character models and movement were also very improved, with a team aiming at the same level on quality found in 3D films and television. They also tampered it with a brand new shader called the Atmospheric Shader, with Arise being made exclusively for modern hardware. Tomizawa also stated that while the team was aiming for a level of quality that can be enjoyed globally, the game would not neglect its Japanese fans. Art director and character designer was Minoru Iwamoto, who actually worked on both Tales of Berseria and Zestiria. Now, Tales of Arise had lots of cut content and some drastic changes from its previous builds. The world design went for a more darker direction compared to the other earlier entries, both to further the series' evolution and appeal to the Western market. Arise also had lots of cut content including missing fish, with a 6 total of unused fish, which is present in the game's files, especially according to their names and description. There are also other mentions of grade in this game, with a grade shop that was originally in prior Tales games, but was missing with a brand new different mechanic. There was also going to be a planned minigame that would involve card games, similar to both Tales of Abyss, Vesperia, and even Berseria had. However, that was also cut, as well as a play record cut that resolved things like grade acquired, grade used, destruction points destroyed, and cleared TP puzzle maps. There were even some cut side quests that would involve even tutorials for the various boost strikes of each characters, while also having some other cut side quests that would involve cut dialogue, and even early version of Ganabelt's dungeon. Tales of Arise was initially leaked ahead before its initial reveal at E3 2019 during the Xbox conference. And while the game was initially slated for PlayStation 4, Xbox One and PC via 2020, however, due to COVID, the game was delayed, as some of the dev team had to switch to develop the game remotely, and thus was absent throughout the whole year. However, near the end of 2020 to early 2021, Tomozawa did state that the game was actually in its final stages of development. In March 2021, when the Tales of Festival 2020 happened, we did get a slightly extended teaser for Tales of Arise, which actually showed for the first time English voices. And then a month later, we would get a full-on brand new trailer, which not only showed us 2 new Pi members, but also release date for 10th of September 2021. And that Arise would also have next-gen versions for both PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series, day and date with the last-gen versions, and also offering a free upgrade. With that, we also had a brand new team that focused specifically for the next-gen versions of Tales of Arise, which was being led by Shoji Ikegami and a specific team to work it simultaneously with the current gen versions, to make sure that the last-gen versions weren't entirely inferior. Among that surge of news, new gameplay footage and previews, including one where you both had Tomizawa and even Anabuki from Scar Nexus collab together to showcase their own games. As months went by, we had lots of promotion marketing for this game, like major events as Summer Games Fest, which revealed the final 2 Pi members, as well as various journalists and content creators being playing a preview build of this game. And even smaller streams dedicated to the Tales series on YouTube showed more info about the game, from its combat to its story to the skits and fishing. We also even had Gamescom, where famed violinist Lindsey Sterling played the battle theme Flame of Hope in a very lovely Xion cosplay. Around August, we also had a free demo that was more of a combat-focused demo similar to the preview, while other game journalists like Game Informer played a preview of the game's opening act. Tales of Arise would eventually release in 10th of September for 2021 for both PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series, and PC via Steam. Its themes. Now, past Tales games would have previous themes, let alone its own characteristic genre. For example, Tales of the Abyss has Meaning of One Life, while Tales of Vesperia has What is True Justice, Tales of Exilia would have Unwavering Convictions, and Tales of Berseria would have Will versus Reason. Now, as for Tales of Arise's theme, it's known as Inheritance and Evolution, while the characteristic is actually called Which Heralds the Heart's Dawn, an RPG that tells the dawn of the heart. And another theme it also goes into is being Challenge the Fate that Binds You, with it challenging the fate that binds the characters and their world, Dana, by Iranian oppression. The game also explores themes of both freedom, revolution, and overcoming adversity as characters from different backgrounds unite to fight for a better future, which is what I appreciated with the story, as well as the whole inheritance and evolution part represents the game's approach to both honor the legacy of the Tales series while also pushing the series forward with more modern gameplay and visuals. The developers aim to balance both the comfort and familiarity of the series with a new evolved experience that will appeal to both existing fans and new players, which, given that this was also a game celebrating the 25th anniversary of Tales, it would also do a lot of things that would respect its own past but still carve out its very own future. The story of Tales of Arise, Act 1. In this
hang on. Spoiler alert!
Spoiler!
In this tale set in the world of Dana, a world that's more fantastical and natural, filled with life-flowing and everlasting astral energy. However, all of that changed as 300 years ago, the people from the neighboring planet of Rena, which is a more technological and advanced civilization, started invading Dana, conquering the planet and enslaving its inhabitants, while also harnessing all the astral energy for themselves, which would split the world into 5 different realms, ruled by a Renan lord, with a plan to harvest all the astral energy, enough so from the working Dan slaves, and bear them to the master cores and spirit vessels, in order to achieve total supremacy and rule all people of Rena as their own sovereign. In the story, you follow main protagonist Alphen, a Dan slave in the primary realm of Calaglia, who has an iron mask, and not only is he unable to feel pain, but also suffers from amnesia. His life does start to change when he encounters a Renan girl named Shion Vimer Ames Daimor, a person who not only betrays her own people with an agenda of her own, but also is cursed by thorns, as any physical contact with her can inflict immense amounts of pain. Together, their paths align, and so with various allies, they set forth to free the world of Dana, as well as overthrow the Renan oppressors, even find a way where both sides can coexist, among learning the truth about Alphen, the end goal of Shion, and how there's more to this conquest than meets the eye. Now the story itself starts simple at first, with both Alphen and Shion's faithful encounter, and then working together to liberate Calaglia. But once you go to the various realms, like say Sosodia or even Elder Merencia, among of course finding new allies to join you, and face against different lords, and come across various Danans with their own method of rule, and how the Danans are treated, as well as paying off with some very shocking twists and reveals, with both Alphen and Shion, among also background insights and developments with characters like Law, Rinwell or Dohalim. Then you have a pretty interesting narrative for its very first half, and that a lot of people really seem to enjoy. As mentioned, the game itself tackles themes of racism, slavery, oppression, insecurity, self-discovery, and change. The former half is shown through the difference between both Renans and Danans, as they have hostility for each other, where one will devalue the other because of their race, let alone the position, which is essentially the case of the Renans, treating the Danans as lesser beings, as well as the Danans showing vitriol and hatred towards the Renans, especially when it come across one of our main heroes, Rinwell. And we see on each realm on how the Danans, especially in Calaglia, are depicted as slaves being treated brutally during the fiery harsh climates, as well as in Soslodia, they are put on edge and being surveilled, even having to betray one another to survive. And this formula does change rapidly with the upcoming realms, which keeps things fresh in the overall narrative, like how the Danans, especially in the realm of Mahagzar, being mentioned as showing malice and vitriol towards the Renans, even if it shows at their very weakest and most defenseless. And as for the latter three, it's shown through things like Shion's true agenda, the true memory of Alphen, and what they will have to go through as friends, as they carry part of their own end goal, to finish this long vicious cycle and liberate this world. Initially, it may serve as a whole black and white scenario, with the obvious good guys being the Danans against the evil Renans, but later down the line, there's more to this, when the gang finds good Renans like Dohalim, who cares more about peace to help find their cause among those who have supported him. And as mentioned, there are even cruel Danans, especially in Margzar. The world building is fairly solid, and while I wouldn't say it's entirely in depth immediately, it does show some nice fantasy and intrigue, and shows what would be a vibrant and ground tale, with terminologies with things like astral energy, Renans, and their own technology. And at this point, this was what many would say is a strong point for Arise's story. And it was going very nicely, but then we get on to its next act. The story of Tales of Arise, Act 2. Then we come across Act 2, and this is where opinions of this game have become really divided. Now it starts off with the gang have achieved their goal, for the most part. However, something's not right, as Dana gets attacked once more by a wedge to harvest the astral energy. Among that, the team decide to stop the wedge, as well as find a way to head towards the planet of Rena to end this once and for all. And while an interesting next step, the main criticisms for this act is that it can feel often rushed, as you often see on how Dans are adjusting to this new sensation, and then immediately you do come across this brand new threat, fly a starship towards the satellite city, learn something is up, try to fly to the real source of the problem, and then get transported to a safe place with a massive expedition dump, learning the massive truth nuke of what's really going on. And then I'll come across the final dungeon and the ending.
Dear God.
There's more.
No.
And yeah, it's a lot to take in, and kinda does feel a bit unbalanced. Not helped that in the second opening, we did see the gang battling all of the wedge spirits. However, in the actual story, we only fight one, that being the Fleet Malin boss, which is basically the same as the giant flaming avatar in the Bolsa fight. As the other spirits are just relegated to post-game fights instead. While there's no source of confirmation, I do think it would stand to reason that originally it was meant to mirror Act 1's structure, where the gang would disable the wedge and fight the spirits, in a similar vein on how they would take down the lords before going to Lenegus. Another issue I've seen people mention is the whole jump the shark approach that Arise took, where the game felt like it shifted to a different series, especially when it comes across Lenegus and the final dungeon, where it feels less like Tales and more so like Star Ocean, which is a rival series to this Tales series, among also recycling plot points from Scarlet Nexus, like another JRPG that Bandai Namco made with the Tales team in the same year, protagonist having vague flashbacks to a girl that looks like our main heroine, and a late game plot dump about aliens that will fundamentally change in the whole story. Now jokes aside, I think it's a little bit disingenuous, just as much as the whole Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy VII Remake comparisons are, just because Nomura himself directed both of those games, well mainly the first part of 7 Remake. And sure, it's very common for various works of fiction to have similar tropes, but really that's just a coincidence. Now as for the Star Ocean part, as someone who's actually played the games, and I can see the vibes, even coming across the shocking reveal where Renans are actually modified Danans, which appears to be shocking as much as, well, Star Ocean 3's infamous twist. And funny enough, the next Star Ocean game, The Divine Force, even has a plot point revolving around the Sovereign. And our main heroine also wears white garbs at one point. So yeah, that's kind of funny. Now, while it does feel a bit jarring to see all of this unfold, and honestly, I don't think it's that outlandish, or even that bizarre, as it was basically the devs putting a brand new spin on the whole twin races plans formula that past Tales games would even have. As things were very slowly foreshadowed. As things were slowly teased, like the giant flame monster and Bolsev's confusion, as well as also the dangers of astral energy, and how the Red Woman for each lord weren't much of a focus until now. And we also had some dangers with things like the Hollowing and the Fruit of Helghan. Now granted, some Tales games do have notorious final acts that compromise the quality of their game within the fandom, and Arise sort of does kind of fall into the camp. But even with those issues I mentioned, I don't think it ultimately sours the entire experience, and I would do at least commend the devs for trying something ambitious and completely unexpected, let alone trying to do something risky with the whole traditional twin world, twin races formula that they had in other Tales games. It was completely something new and, I'd say, ambitious. Now sure, some of the lore dumps could have been handled a lot better. I do think that some of the aspects within Act 2 could have been a lot more better-paced and structured, but ultimately, I don't think it entirely ruined the game, as Act 2 does still have some very strong redeeming moments, some of which I'll go later in depth in the segments, as a lot of them does carry the whole story for me. The main characters. Then we get to the main characters. Now when it comes to the core cast of Tales of Arise, I think all of them are pretty good, with each of them having their own personalities, motives, flaws, and some development that kept me interested, whether it's either shown or rather subtle, among also having characteristics and banter that really bounce off each other, and has overall a dynamic that I think is really charming, like they are a real family. Alphen is definitely a cool protagonist. Now I've seen some people say that he's either boring, bland, or generic, and comes across as a goody-good. However, I disagree, as Alphen starts off as respectful, but also vengeful and bitter in Calagria, especially towards the Renans, seeing so many tortured and killed and can't stand them any longer. His life changes when he meets both Zephyr and Shion, with Zephyr providing him a new chance of life, to live and be free on his own terms, and help free the Danans and rebel against the Renans, while also trying not to go bloodthirsty and kill every single last one of them. And then the other one is Shion, a Renan who betrays her own kind and is willing to take down all the lords, and even if it's for her own selfish needs. Which gives an outlook on his overall perspective, if there are any good Renans as well as even bad Danans, which is further amplified when you come across characters like Dohalim and his Renans, as well as the Darkwings, who are Danans but cruel. He's prone to anger at times, especially when it comes to arguing with Shion, getting vengeful against Ganabelt, and as mentioned, even punching against Deadime. Not help, once we learn his true memories, and even loses Shion at one point, he feels guilt and trauma, learning that in the past, he's taken so many lives, even if it was just an accident, and when he learns the truth about Renans and Danans, he no longer shows malice towards them, even if they are despicable people, as he even tries to sympathize with them, especially Volron. His optimism and tendency to bring hope to others and being caring towards his new friends, especially with Shion, makes him an overall enjoyable character. He's even a goofball in skits, with his love of spicy food. Ray Chase, who's known as Noctis from Final Fantasy XV, and even played Artorias from the previous Tales game Berseria, really gives a really great performance.
My name is Alphen!
Shion is another character I absolutely love, as she's the overall emotional core of the story, as much as Alphen. Serving as the main heroine, now initially she starts off as both cold, calculating, and sometimes a bit callous, and oftentimes a bit of a tsundere. Now, I know first impressions of her might have been a bit soured, but once you do go later down the line, she becomes more open and respectful, and we can understand why she was at first selfish, going against her own people even, as she was a Renan who was cursed with these thorns that once distanced herself from her own potential friends, being experimented at once, and it drove her to self-isolation that all she does is become alone. And that's why she was also eager to get things done efficiently, as we learn the darkness from those thorns will consume everything, among why she struggled a bit when talking to her new-found friends, and even argued with Alphen, because finding a way to get rid of those thorns is also what prevents her from dying, and doing so, it would kill her. Even a moment where she was captured and alone and broken, her friends were willing to keep pressing on and bear the pain together, and also when Shion was also going to go by herself to save everyone at the cost of her own life, her friends once again push back and be willing to defy fate and try to find a way to fix her. And that is when she became more kinder and nicer, showing a great leap of development, which ultimately led to one of the best moments of the game, let alone in Act 2, among the chemistry between Alphen. And she was very genuine, with her leading to probably one of the best romances in the Tales series, on top of a really powerful and satisfying ending. Other characters like Rinwell, Law, Kisara, and Dohalim are all interesting and fun in their own right. Now, regarding Rinwell, just like with Shion, she starts off brash and arrogant, especially towards the Renans, which includes both Shion and Dohalim respectively. And she shows no more than ill will towards them for what they've done. And she can sometimes come across as abrasive and paranoid, especially towards the Elder Menancia arc, where even when Renans seem peaceful towards Danans, she's paranoid and she just doesn't believe it. Some might say she'd come across as racist, second only to Wakka from Final Fantasy X, who was notorious about his discrimination towards a very certain race. However, like Wakka, she sees the error of her ways and develops to become nicer and respectful. As we also learn, she was a Danan mage, a group of Danans that can wield astral arts, and lived in fear of hiding and persecution by her own fellow Danans, until a Renan Lord came and murdered the entire of her race, including her own parents, which not only broke her, but filled with so much vengeance and lust and hatred among all Renans, that has led her to be so alone and continue to live on by just sheer hatred and to get revenge on finding the Lord that killed her parents, which turned out to be Almadria, even to the point that she wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone in her way when she found that person. However, among also seeing the goods in Renans like Shion and Dohalim, as well as the bad in Danans with Dohalim, along with Law preventing her rage to get the best out of her, her outlook changes and becomes nice towards Renans as a whole, and decides to live on a future in mind. Even if she doesn't forgive Almadria, her killer, and the crime she committed, she's willing to let herself be brought into justice, and rather than to murder her to satisfy her own revenge. Among that, being also a mage, she has the ability to commune with astral energy, and is the reason why she can communicate with Dana's will, which becomes very important in Act 2. Overall, Rinwell is an amazing character, among also having a cute owl named Hutu, who by the way, is the best Tales mascot since Rapide. Moving on, we also have Law. Now similar to Rinwell, he's also young, and also has some other anger issues, especially when he's the son of Zephyr, who's the leader of the Crimson Crows, and that same man who helped Shion and Alphen join to defeat Bolseth and liberate all of Calaglia. We also learned that he couldn't stand his own father, putting his need for the resistance over caring for his own wife, and when she passed, Zephyr even attended the funeral, and that drove Law to abandon him and move to Cyslodia, which led him to join the Snake Eyes, a Renan spy force led by Ganabelt. And when he sees his own father again, he's quick to anger and willing to kill him. However, he soon changes his own tune when he hears Zephyr's plea, and right before his execution and realizes the mistake he made, Ganabelt, his own superior, kills him, and that ultimately causes Law to not only feel regret, but take his hatred and anger towards him. However, after killing him, he ultimately feels hollow and feels purposeless, among also feeling guilty for leading Zephyr's death like that, much unlike how Rinwell practiced magic at the point which got Almadria's attention, which led to the extinction of her own race. It was only then until Alphen comes, who gives him a new purpose in life, to help him join and find a new reason to protect the ones he hold dear, and even help Rinwell, especially during a pivotal moment in Mahagzar. Now, further note, I've also known that some people have issues with this entire scene, with Law preventing Rinwell to kill Almadria, but to me, I can see why he made that move, as in Law's defense, He doesn't want Rinwell to fall in the same hole Lord did when he was consumed by hatred and revenge, and that ultimately left him with nothing. Among also that Omega might have had a trick up her sleeve and play right into her hands. And we also saw just beforehand that so many Dahnans who absolutely hated this woman died before their very eyes, including the Dime. And also that the Dime was an absolutely terrible person because of his hatred that shaped him to be a worse Dahnan than anyone combined. Law also serves as a comic relief, and he has some very nice quirky moments here, but you honestly can't help but love. And he overall makes for a cute pairing with Rinwell. Then we get to Kisara. Now, she's often depicted as the kind and more mature and caring person, basically being the gang's surrogate mother. We see her at first as a Dahnan knight who's loyal to Dohalim, who rules Antagonists, and like Law, she has bitter history with a family member, that being her brother Megal. Despite being close as kids when they grew up, they had their own differences when it comes to Dohalim. Even though Megal was in the right, and after the sacrifice, it led to Kisara to not only feel regret, but leave her in shambles. Her outlook is to follow and latch onto the dream for coexistence, and Dahnans to be in peace. Her development comes across more subtle than others. Not fully outright compared to the others, but where some people may say she's the least development, she still has something to look out for. As not only that, but we do see some aspects of development, as her knight persona fades away, and she becomes her own person, and even acts as a mother to help straighten the gang out of arguments and discipline them, as well as acknowledge Dohalim as an individual, and contribute to the team as best as they can. Then we get to Dohalim Ilkaris, who's actually one of the 5 Renan Lords in this year's Crown Contest, being the Earth Lord, and one who rules Eldermancia. But unlike his peers, he doesn't care about the contest, let alone enslaving Dahnans. And it's why his new rule lets both Dahnans and Renans peacefully coexist. He's very well versed in he's very in tune with history, artifacts and music, and speaks in a more poetic tone. But the real reason he opted this path of coexistence is more so that back at time at Lenegis, when he trained to become a lord, he ultimately took the life of a fellow Renan in self-defense and was shamed by his own friends. This guilt ultimately traumatized him, and so he did the best to ensure that no one would be screaming. And when we saw his PTSD triggered when Megal died and Kisara both screamed and cried, it made him go berserk. And after learning the truth that his own advisor turned his back on him in secret and even caused an uprising, he decided to join his new friends and put an end to the crown contest that plagued the lives of both Dahnans and Renans. He's also very polite and has moments of shine, especially when using his temporary lord status to inspire others, particularly during the moment at Lenegis. Overall, the cast in this game, paired with lots of great banter and dynamics through both the story, the combat, bonding events and skits, and you have, in my opinion, one of my favorite casts in all of Tales, paired in with some really great voice acting here. And honestly, there's even a decent amount of side characters. Some of them are also compelling in their own ways, and some of them are actually quite funny. The antagonists, the Renans. Now we get on to the Renans, that being the villains here, with some of them being mostly interesting, as particularly the lords are presented in the story as the main oppressors for all Dahnans, and as well our party that really contrasts the overall themes of Arise as a whole. And each of them act like a main villain, when the irony is that all of them are sent victims and slaves to something far greater that they're completely unaware of. And while they're not as developed as, say, the main cast, they do serve as solid foils and obstacles for our cast to face. And what's interesting here is on how each lord's way of ruling their own realms is actually reflective of their overall characteristics. Bolsef, aka Elwozi Tildes, who's actually the Fire Lord of Kalagia, is presented to be a big brute who often punished both Danans and his even fellow Renan soldiers harshly, which is reflective of how the Danans are treated to mine in the very harsh fiery conditions of Calaglia. He's dangerous, and is why, as the major first boss, he's a foe you do not want to take lightly. He's known to lose the contest twice, and he's even disgusted that not only his Master Core was stolen, but also that Shion betrayed the Renans. He's quick to anger, and actually a good friend of mine once said that Bolsev resembles on how weak power is in front of politics and deception. His power went down the moment someone challenged it. You can't win by using power alone. There will always be a stronger person, and that stronger person is his liberator, in the form of Alphen. And while we don't see him a lot in the story, we do learn at Lenegus that actually cares deeply about his members of his own very own house, and he even wishes to improve their own standing. Then we get on to Ganabelt Valkyries, who's actually the Lord of Light and ruler of Sicilia, and he's shown to be a more cunning lord than, say, Bolsev, with him being a master of subterfuge, sowing mistrust among Danans by encouraging informants to betray their own people, exerting authority with minimum effort, which in his way of ruling. He's able to create replicas to pose as him, as well as use his own deceit by disguising as a resistance leader to build false hope for Sicilia, and to lure out Alphen and the Blazing Sword to his very own advantage, ultimately being one step ahead, and is also a personal obstacle as he ultimately kills Zephyr, Law's father and the leader of the Crimson Crows, which both angers Law and Alphen to set revenge upon him. We also do learn that on Lenegus that despite being cast towards Danans, that he does care about the Renans, doing everything he can for them. We do find out that he cares a great deal about the Renan people, and he will do anything he can for them. Kelselik, who's actually a Renan advisor in service to Lord Dohalim, is actually also a snake who betrays against him, being disgusted to see a Renan lord helping the Danans, which would fundamentally ruin the pride of Renans as a whole, and something he would absolutely contest to, with him being in service with Almadria, being the one who even tests the infamous fruit of Helgen, and goes into the foods of anyone except his own personal guard. Take anyone who will question Dohalim's authority to the quarry, which was built on the false pretense of a medical facility, but rather it's a lake of those who hollowed, after their bodies were stripped of astral energy, from that very fruit alone, which turns them nothing into a puddle. While he may not be as powerful compared to the others, he does get a hold of a personal Zugul. However, he's still frail and weak, and even when his jig is up, he quickly leaves away scared. Later down, once you get to the optional events, we do find him, and learn that he's gone mad and insane, being haunted by the many people he killed in service to Almadria, but because of her absence, he has no one to shift the blame to, let alone the capacity to be responsible for that guilt. Hence why he's gone insane. And then we have Almadria Canaris, the Lord of Wind and ruler of Mahagza, who's definitely more wicked and cruel than both Ganabelt and even Bolsev combined, being the one who has the habit of using the lives of both Danans and even Relans for her own experiments to create more powerful Zulguls, being the one who put the Dynamage's race to extinction, including killing Rinwell's own parents, and being the one who is able to master their very own magecraft for her own selfish purposes, and even using underhanded tactics like using the Fruit of Helgen to gain a massive amount of astral energy, even playing as a weak and frail ruler being defeated by the Dark Wings and the Dime, ready to be killed, only for them to die by her very own hands, with no shame whatsoever. She's borderline sadistic, and we would even find hate by Danans to be plentiful and music to her ears, and would do anything for power. Even when she's defeated and powerless, and Rinwell decides not to kill her, she finds it unacceptable, and at a moment at weakness, she would turn to Volron, possibly to be under his wing and be protected, and eventually betray him, though ultimately that led to her being killed and tossed immediately. We also learned that Almedria had effectively killed any man in her family, using any means to gain position and acquire respect, even if she is regarded among by women, and ultimately, and even a villain, we're not necessarily meant to like even. The main villains are looking to Volron and the Great Spirit, and that brings me to both the main villains of Tales of Arise, that being Volron Igniseri and the Great Spirit. Both of them I feel get often mixed reactions from people, though like with the other villains, I do find them interesting in their own ways. With Volron Igniseri, the Water Lord, as well as ruler of Ganapharos, and he's also the other sovereign, he essentially serves as the exact polar opposite of Alfin, and shows on how much power can corrupt someone to the point of feeling inhumane without any consequence. We see his palace when leaving Calaglia, and then see him directly, first killing Zugals in Cislodia, and then he comes to attack and strike towards Alfin on the way to Margzar, as he is more than likely the other sovereign, and in a way challenges his very rule, and would even spite him with doing things like kidnap Shion and even mockingly invite him to his palace to solve things once and for all. He's all about controlling life and death the way he sees fit, which is apparent when all the subjects in Pelagion, his own fortress, give their own lives in service of him, even being brainwashed without any resistance. Honestly, that part is very dark. We do learn that just like with Alfin, he also became a sovereign, but was deemed too unstable, as likely that experiments that turned him made him go insane, on top of him also being disposed, which caused him to become truly uncontrollable, upon also being alone, which also explains why we also learned that the previous lord of Ganapharos was murdered by him and he took over. He essentially wants to control all life and death the way he sees fit, even conspiring to take down the astral spirit all himself during the finale of the game. And when he's defeated by Alfin and he shows his sympathies, it was the last straw, and just to spite Alfin one more, he ultimately destroys himself and arrests Olma, almost teetering on the edge of nihilism. And while admittedly, Volron could have been developed a little bit further, I do think it was effective. And then we get on to the great astral spirit of Rena, the overall mastermind and being more of a sentient god, among also being a result of a cursed existence, where both Dana and Rena were originally meant to be one world, and it is a being that is centered on survival and needs to consume astral energy, revealing that the world of Rena is actually lifeless, and Dana's astral energy is right for the taking. So it employs and manipulates the Helganquil to gather it by any means necessary, and is the sole reason for Shion's curse, as fragments of its core that passed down from generation of Naoi's bloodline came with Shion, who is actually Naoi's descendant, and those thorns are even a part of the great astral spirit itself, that would consume everything in all existence till it's satisfied. Now, like with Volron, the great spirit does get some flack, though I don't think you're entirely meant to reason with it, mostly of it being based on survival and on how it used things like a crown contest, the wedge, and even the spirit challenge ceremony as a means to an end, being afraid to die and unending hunger. And in a way, its appearance was foreshadowed with the flaming astral spirit during the boss fight, as it shares a similar design to both it and the Freed Malem, a being of overwhelming avarice, desiring to consume all astral energy, which will result in oblivion. Not only that, but the Great Spirit itself was able to subject its own people, the Helganquil, to mind control, even maintaining a lie that lasted for 300 years or more to control the natives of Dana with a twisted, arbitrary hierarchy of preferring the more powerful subjects without regarding their consent. And that emotion it has changes to either fear, anger, and hatred, especially when the party interferes. And ultimately, the Great Astral Spirit itself serves as an obstacle for the gang to create a brand new and better world. The visuals. Now we get on to the visuals, and arguably it was one of the major appeals and selling points with Tales of Arise. which was of course the very beautiful visuals and graphics. Where prior Tales games would use in-house engines, Arise's uses Unreal Engine 4, and much like other Bandai Namco properties, it proved to be a very handy tool, and much like on how other Japanese companies use it, with things like Square Enix with Kingdom Hearts 3, Dragon Quest XI, and Final Fantasy VII Remake, or even Atlus, using it for Persona 3 Reload and SMT5 Vengeance. But Arise uses something very clever, with adding what's called the atmospheric shader, which gives the environments and textures this watercolor feeling. And yeah, it looks very beautiful, with each location standing out with some very beautiful biomes and other effects that gives each realm and dungeon and area such variety and character, like the fires surrounding Calaglia, the snow and nightlights around Cislodia, or even the warm sun and beautiful greenery of Elder Menancia. It is truly a sight to behold, and packed in with a dynamic day and night cycle where some of these just look absolutely amazing in both nighttime and daytime, you have a really stunning looking game. The characters are also really designed well. Now I heard some gripes with how the characters overall look, as some of them don't have the over-the-top anime designs that prior Tales characters had. And really, that's farther from the actual truth, when other Tales characters had both simple but effective designs that really still look good, and Arise is no exception. All of the designs here really pop off, and actually fun fact, each of them represent both in a trait of character and an animal. And you know what, I'll be honest here, Shion is definitely the most beautiful character out here. And as for Kisara, I mean, have you seen her?
Yeah, boy.
And as for the side characters and even the Zurgles and villains, also really look nice. The cutscenes are on top form and look great here, especially the more emotional and fight scenes, enhanced beautifully by motion capture. Even idle animations are cute as well, and the UI for the most part is really well done. And just like with other Tales games, there's a nice splash of anime cutscenes done by Ufotable, and they really look nice here, especially the two openings, as well as the overall ending, and have some of the best moments in the actual game. Game performance on PS5 runs absolutely silky smooth. However, there are some contentions. One obviously is the draw distance, where even to this day it's quite rough, as you'll get noticeable pop-in for both environments and NPCs, which is a little bit jarring. The next odd thing would have to be the odd removal of cut-ins during Mystic Arts, though the flashing lines do alleviate that. And probably the most controversial thing about Arise would have to be the skits, and more so how they're presented. Where Arise goes for a more comic style panel sort of approach, but using the in-game models, and this caused a big stir in the community with the loss of 2D art skits, and pointing on how stiff they really feel. And some people say it feels like they copy-pasted Scarlet Nexus's cutscenes, when in reality these skits are actually 2.5D. And you know what? I have a bit of a hot take here, and I think it actually kind of works, as it's woven more seamlessly here, and has more opportunity here to show both flashbacks, among its very special detail is showing the current cosmetics that they are currently wearing. And while not all of them are bangers, a lot of them did give me a bit of a laugh here. And just like with Scarlet Nexus, the skits are a bit of an acquired taste here. Though hey, at the very least, most of them are optional, though some of them are still sadly automatic, just like the skits cutscenes in Berseria. The combat. Now with this game, we get to one of the more exciting, albeit divisive combat systems, depending on who you talk to. Now Tales of Arise's combat system features a new take on the overall franchise's signature linear motion battle system, with having real-time action combat featuring interlinking systems. However, this one in Arise offers things like more free movement, allowing you to move around and position your attacks, and even also having a jump button, an aspect where some Tales games would even lean to especially when 3-1 became more of a standard thing. In the last few releases, ever since Graces, with the exception of the Xillia duology, the game would use an art tree to chain arts together in various combos, with normal attacks being a thing of the past even. However, Arise brings the normal attacks back, with them returning to starting out with a 3-hit combo for both ground and aerial attacks, that later evolves to do more hits, followed with arts also playing a focus here, with having, at the start, both free ground and free aerial arts that can be chained, and cost AG to regenerate over time. Though various things like doing more criticals, perfect dodges, or even using boost attacks can refill that much faster, and the limit of your AG goes all the way from 3 to 10. And while you do start with essentially 6 arts, once you have your full party, you have the combination to do at least 12 art combinations possible, and fully be able to switch them to suit on how you play. Another major point is the focusing on evading and countering, where 5 of the 6 characters have the ability to dodge attacks, and if they time it well, they can follow up with a counter attack, which is a nice twist on the whole backstep that Graces F introduced, and even both Zestiria and Berseria also used. Another new addition would have to be is the boost strike and the boost attacks, with the latter of which being an iteration of Berseria's Soulbreak, where each character have the ability to topple or stagger enemies respective of their own type, and they recharge over time. Though, unlike Berseria, you have the freedom to choose which one to activate, even if you're not playing as that same character, and each have their very own use, with Alvin's blazing sword toppling down majority of the foes and bosses. Shion's been able to take down flying enemies, Rinwell, just like Magilu, being able to interrupt enemy arts and steal it for herself, Law being able to take down armored and heavy foes, Dohalim being able to stop enemies that will dodge your attacks fast, or even Kisara being able to stop charging enemies. Upon that, both boost attacks would even provide some nice perks for both offensive and defensive, like for example Kisara's being able to provide defensive buffs every time you use her boost attack. But not only that, they can also serve as damage extenders, or even able to counter enemy attacks, and also be a neat way of switching between party members. As for boost strikes, if you and your party are able to chain combos on enemies consistently, you are able to finish them off with a boost strike, which will insta-kill them with these very sick and flashy team-up attacks, which is essentially a combination of both Vesperia's Fatal Strikes and Xillia's linked arts. Upon that, likely also from Graces F, characters will also have special perks depending on the conditions, like Alphen using flaming arts at the end of a combo, Shion being able to detonate her bombs with a higher blast radius, Law gaining an attack and multiplier buff until he cost takes damage, Rinwell transforming one art into a more powerful art, Dohalim's own rod extending after a perfect dodge to perform a much better hit range, and Kisara, the only one that can actually guard, being able to cast arts while blocking after she does a perfect guard. And the brilliant thing about this is that each character have their own unique playstyle, and all of them feel really good to play. And with things like the skill panels that provide things like new skills, titles, arts and buffs, upon equipping weapons and customizing accessories on offer, you essentially have a lot of room to create some really strong builds. Also, making a return since Tales of Hearts are, Over Limit makes a comeback, where if you do enough perfect dodges or even take a good amount of damage, you have the ability to use as many arts as possible before ending off with a mystic art. However, one mechanic that I think is quite underutilized and underrated would have to be the strategy mechanic, where you're given various ways to toggle both party behavior and customize various commands based on the conditions of your own choice. And in a way, it's similar to the Gambit system from Final Fantasy XII, and having learned its uses, it's actually a really cool system upon a replay, and I think it deserves much better appreciation. And the last combat mechanic we have to talk about that does affect gameplay would have to be the kill point system, or CP for short, which is this small circle that gets spent whenever characters would use healing arts or support arts till it reaches 0, and can only be refilled by using various gels or healing points before a boss, or even resting at inns and camps. Among that, CP is also spent to take down obstacles in dungeons and even heal injured NPCs. This one is a little bit controversial, but I think it actually adds more tension and challenge to carefully manage your resources and try your best on not taking too much damage. There are other gripes that Arise does have in terms of combat, like on how various enemy designs and mini-bosses are reused a lot, as you see some of the same types with just different skins. Though that is the case, some of them do have just different weaknesses or resistances, as well as slightly new attack patterns that do keep them mostly fresh, and it's there to test your approach on how to deal with them, especially with the various boost strikes you have on top of that, and the various arts you even have on possible. Another gripe is similar to Visions of Mana, there is no code, which is a bit of a shame, but given the fact that this game was developed especially during around the pandemic, I do think that probably went to the cutting room floor. But hey, there's at least a mod on it on PC. Though not gonna lie, I find it a bit odd on how the new East games have actually co-op in them, albeit on PC, but still quite weird. However, the most controversial one in terms of its gameplay would have to be the bosses and some bigger foes, and how they're depicted as quite tanky, and that they can't be regularly hit stunned, and have a lot of HP. Now, while that is the case, and I'm not gonna lie, I do think it's a little bit of a shame that they can't be comboed regularly, they can still be dealt with, as things like the various boost attacks can topple them, as well as being affected by status ailments, and if you have good enough levels and stats, you can essentially crunch down on their HP no problem, and doing things like executing perfect dodges can even stagger them or even interrupt their own attacks, as a lot of the big enemies would have orange weak points, and breaking them allows for a temporary stun as well as an opening for a combo. And if you have a good amount of penetration in your kit, you can essentially knock down bosses. Even the lords like say Bolseth or Voron can stumble or fall over, among also having special boost attacks, which are these cool badass cinematic attacks that just absolutely look awesome. Now sure, not all bosses are winners here, heck some of them have a special place in hell in my mind, but even still, there's a lot of them that stick to me in a more positive way, with their hard-hitting attacks that are well telegraphed, especially when they go to overlimit halfway, and even some of them even pulling devastating mystic arts to evade, like a desperation move, and it gives you ample time to learn and find ways on how to counter them, and essentially even the accessories are handy against certain bosses. That being said, if I had some actual gripes, I do wish art cancelling was a thing, so that a way you can get out of the way after doing a long combo animation. Though luckily there's also a mod on that. Another thing is that the camera could have been better doing certain fights, and I do wish we could have activated over limit whenever we want. And yes, I too do wish that gold was earned after killing enemies. Though the bonus battle gauge is a nice way to engage with its combat and give nice rewards. Overall, I think the combat in Arise is actually damn good. And what's odd about the divisiveness surrounding it is that many people say it feels more like Star Ocean than Tales. And sure, both of them have like similar combat systems, but the thing is, Arise still has the traits of Tales combat, from screaming attack names to mystic arts, and various systems lifted down from previous games, mixed in to make its own unique spin. And I say that because the recent mainline Star Ocean game has a combat system that feels remotely similar to various Tales games. Furthermore, the remake of Star Ocean 2 has a mechanic that feels similar to Arise's boost attacks. But even then, both games still have their own perks that feel appropriate to the respective series. The music. Then we get to the overall soundtrack, and I think this is actually a pretty good soundtrack overall, with long-running composer Motoi Sakuraba returning to give a rather beautiful OST, with a lot of the tracks blending well to the background and atmosphere, as a lot of the area themes just feel very atmospheric and dynamic as a whole, probably tied with Xillia as some of his best recent works in my opinion. Though I think what really works out would have to be both the battle themes and the dungeon themes, with the latter being more calmer and more atmospheric, where when you get to the fights, they become more intense, with guitars and more rock. The theme songs by Kankaru Piero as well as Ayaka are absolutely beautiful. With that said, here's a sample of my favorite tracks. Game design and content. Now we get to the overall structure of the game, and overall, the game design for Tales of Arise is mostly good. Now the world design leans more to the semi-open, sublinear camp that a lot of JRPGs follow and excel in, which is pretty good, with lots of locations having different pathways, and some of them feeling more grandeur than others, on top of things having things like finding ingredients, fishing spots, artifacts, owls and chests and items. Overall makes exploring just really fun. And what I really like is that in some places, finding chests and goodies are also hidden, and while there are the occasional narrow ways transitioning between realms and caves, there is still an amount of stuff to explore to your heart's content, without feeling overly too dense. The towns are pretty neat, but when it comes to dungeons, they are a mixed bag, with some of them being very open with alternate pathways like Balthazar's Castle, or even the Glelan Woods, or even Altina Palace. However, you do come across things like Reveal Prison and Mobile Gradia that feel a little bit linear, with some different levels. Upon that, the CPU also plays a role with making some okayish puzzles and also managing your resources. But nothing comes as infamous as the final dungeon, where it drags on and on and on, and it's linear, and surrounded with lots and lots of enemies, including elevators with just so many hoppers. And yep, we play this as a source, and this is not only this now, but it's just like, it's just overly taking over the green road, but it's just so boring and tedious. This is good, I don't know what's to it. The man is just so damn tedious and boring and just, ugh. As for everything else, the side quests are also both hit and miss, with some solid ones that made me laugh and hit hard with the overall story, and the others that just roll around with just killing monsters and collecting items. But at the very least, all of them give really good rewards, like more money, as well as also more SP to spend on new skills and different items. So in a sense, they are definitely worth it, and so much rewarding, and some of them even pack with some of the best bosses in the actual game. Speaking of, the Giants return, being tough and optional bosses, and some of them being mostly challenging and quite fun, and also increase your CP. And there's also the owl collecting, which I'll say right now is amazing, as collecting them from each realm grants you a cosmetic, as well as rewards from the Owl King with more items, cosmetics, and some really funny skits from both the owls and Alfred and Xiao. Just A tier. Both camping and cooking are also nice here, where you get to learn more funny skits, as well as some nice bonus events, where you get to learn more about the cast. And also you get to get the second tier of Mystic Arts for your Pine members, which is a nice reward. Though personally, I do think it would have been better if they were unlocked during a pivotal moment in the story, and maybe have a third tier of Mystic Arts as the optional ones. Doing things like managing ranches to get more ingredients is cool, though fishing is where it's really at, and honestly, it's really amazing, and quite tough at the same time, but can also feel both rewarding and essential. And to cap off what the two best things that Arise has in terms of content, the Colosseum and the postgame, the former of which allowing you to do multiple fights, and even training, and the latter that involves the cameo fights, as well as a full-on cameo dungeon, which not only makes references and homages to past Tales games, but arguably has one of the best dungeons in the entire game. Honestly, it's just S tier. DLC. After the game came out, Tales of Arise had a lot of DLC. Now this is where I kinda have to remove the kid gloves a bit. Now, Arise has things involving XP boost, more gold, SP, as well as levels, as well as costumes. And this was essentially a thing like during the PS3 era, where Bamco would incorporate a lot of those DLCs, among of course other Japanese companies. So it in Arise is not essentially new here, and as essentially they're just paid cheat codes. And the far worst that Tales has come to DLC would have to be adding extra skits behind the paywall, most notably with Zestiria and Berseria, which to this day is just dumb. It's absolutely dumb. It's just, why? Why? Thankfully, Arise doesn't have that. But what it does have instead is when you get the costumes, and acquiring those costumes unlocks new titles, as well as new skill panels. and arts.
I'm gonna throw up.
Upon that, they also have a music DLC of past games that cost half of the base game. And that was when it was out. And just, yikes! I just don't know what the publisher was thinking about that. And also it just kinda sucks. And I hope that aspect never comes back in the next installment. I know it's a practice for other various companies to pull this up, whether it's Nintendo, Sega, Capcom, Koei, and Falcom. But even then, it's just a step too far. But, moving on from that, there are also the free DLC that comes in form of new Coliseum fights that reward new cosmetics, as well as even collab items from games like even Atelier Sophie 2 and Scar Nexus, the latter of which I also failed to mention in my Scar Nexus retrospective, as they also had a collab with Tales of Rise in that game as well. And then there's also the Sword Art Online collab, which allows you to fight against Kirito and Asuna, and also give you new mystic art and new costumes from them, which is great, even though it's a little bit pricey, not gonna lie. But hey, stopping these two is absolutely fine and awesome. However, we get to the last case, and that is the expansion DLC. Now, originally prior to the main game's release, there weren't any plans to do an expansion DLC. However, obviously, due to Rise's success with strong sales and numbers and overwhelmingly positive reviews and accolades, they did change their tune, with giving us an expansion DLC called Beyond the Dawn, which is essentially a 20-hour epilogue that takes events after the base game, and was actually released 2 years after the base game's release, with it following in the same footsteps as Alicia's story from Tales of Zestiria, or even the bigger inspiration would have to be the future arc from Tales of Graces F. Among that, there were also some small prelude web novels that would essentially tell what the gang has been doing in the intermediate times. Now, I said my piece about it in my review. However, while I do still hold some of my true feelings towards it, and I actually do enjoy it, I do admit, and I have to confess, that it is way too expensive for its own worth. As, while it does have like a nice touching story with seeing the new world and how they react to it, among also having Alphen get a new character arc, as well as Shion being more kind and sincere, and the introduction of Nazumu, who was a very interesting and more sympathetic villain. However, everything else just felt completely flat, with nothing too major outside of a lot of reused enemy types and bosses. And really, there was no major gameplay additions at all, outside of the special boost attacks which are awesome and absolutely epic, especially during the Coliseum fights in the final boss. But even then, the campaign itself stops midway, and it's just to do more quests, with things like the standard ones to the also new reconstruction ones, among also having both character and EX quests. All of it just feels very quest-based at times. And sadly, if you didn't enjoy Arise, then this DLC wouldn't change your mind. Though what it does excel is having a much better final dungeon than the base game and an epic final boss. And all the character moments for both the EX quests, sequels to some of the best quests example, and even the character quests are still very touching, especially the ones revolving around Shion. And the new song we got is also a banger, and also had the return of Kenji Nobuki involved. However, upon all that, you can tell that this DLC, despite it arriving 2 years after the main game, felt more like a smaller scale project. And had this DLC come just a year after Arise and slightly priced better, I don't think the reactions to it wouldn't be that divisive or just mixed in general. Legacy and Future. When Tales of Rise was released on 10th of September 2021, it received overwhelmingly positive reviews from both media outlets and even general fans, as well as newcomers who loved it as well, with it scoring an 87 on Metacritic and essentially was the highest rated game in the series, and later won accolades like Best Role-Playing Game from the Game Awards, and it currently sitting as both the fastest and best-selling Tales game with a lifetime of 3 million units as of last year, due to things like likely discounts, word of mouth, and even DLC. However, over the time, as you can tell, Tales of Rise seems to be lambasted and heavily criticized. And that mostly comes from die-hard fans with its criticisms, lying that the fact that Arise maybe had changed too much with its direction, to a point that it feels distant from the other series. Now among it also handled its both story and combat. And while I will admit that Arise itself is far from perfect, and some criticisms are warranted, I still do think that Arise is one of the best Tales games out there, especially in the series. And it essentially did what the series was planning to do, get new people in the Tales series and grow as a brand. And while Tales prior was still a good franchise, and still is, it's still a niche franchise. What the general criticism it got was that it feels too stagnant at times. And while I don't 100% fully agree with that statement, I can see what they mean. Heck, upon that time, during the PS3 era, there was more of a divide with the Tales series in terms of direction. And that's why I do think, when Arise came, it took so many risks and changes in order to make new fans, in order to keep the series afloat and relevant, even if some sacrifices were made. It's why you look at certain games from long-running series that innovate and push to a new direction, in the hopes of drawing a new crowd, as the existing crowd can't always fully maintain the series for dear life. It's a thing since video games were a thing essentially if you look at the 90s or even early 2000s, with games like Final Fantasy VII, Persona 3, Resident Evil 4, and to this day it's still going now, with things like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Fire Emblem Three Houses, Yakuza Like a Dragon, and even both Atelier Ryza and Yumiya. A lot of these games are taking a new direction, shifting from the long old formula and trying to feel fresh, even if it's not always a perfect one. And I still hold true that Tales of Arise, as a main goal, was being its core theme, that being inheritance evolution, it still managed to bring newcomers, thanks to things like its visuals, story, characters, and combat, upon its really impressive marketing. And it still, in my opinion, holds the core aspects of a Tales game, and pays tribute, with still having skits, fast-paced action-pie combat, arts and mystic arts, a two-world story with centering on energy that's responsible for both arts, as well as even tackling themes of both prejudice as well as self-discovery, as well as also having banter and music done by Motoi Sakuraba. The anime cutscenes are still there, being done by Ufotable, and you still even have a post-game dungeon and cameo battles. And yes, even if it did make some changes that not everyone agrees with, it still took risks, and whether or not it pays off in next installment, all we can do is hope. However, the biggest problem with Arise surrounding it is what came after, as the momentum kind of dwindled for the series, with lots of the more Tales mobile games got shut down, and even some of the past Tales games even got delisted in the storefront from the PlayStation, with them slowly restoring that momentum with the Tales Remaster project. And while it was a rough start with Symphonia, and even Arise's DLC didn't contribute much, though things are obviously getting better, with things like Tales of Graces F Remastered, and even Tales of Exilium Remastered. Now, there's also some discussion here that if Arise should or would get a sequel, like with Xillia, Destiny, or Symphonia. Though that does seem to fall into the wayside now thanks to the existence of Beyond the Dawn. And honestly, I do think it's for the better, and I'm going to say this, cause while I really love Tales of Arise and cherish it, I don't think it needs a sequel. The story is already complete, and I do think we really need to move on, and for the next Tales game to be fresh and original, while taking what worked in Arise and what didn't, and improving upon it. And that's something I really want, and that's all I can ever ask for. But before we wrap up, I actually got a few special guests here who like to share their own personal memories and feelings towards Tales of Arise. With that said, the stage is all yours, guys.
Thank you so much, Kaiser, for having me on this collab video, especially for a game that means so much to me. And it's kind of crazy looking back on Tales of Arise after all these years, because Tales of Arise started my channel. Now, technically, I started with Genshin Impact content, but I try to ignore all that. Truly, my YouTube and Twitch journey started with Tales of Arise. I was kind of new to JRPGs. I've only played around like 3 of them, and then I loved Tales of Arise so much that it inspired me to make my Twitter and start meeting like-minded people like Kaiser. I met a bunch of wonderful friends that I'm still friends with till this day, and a bunch bunch of other creators, and again, it's kickstarted my YouTube journey, which is just really special for me. And then as a Tales game, it kickstarted my Tales journey. I played around 9 Tales games back to back after Tales of Arise because I loved it, and I'm like, I need to go through all the Tales games. And it was really interesting going from Arise's combat system back to the previous games, because the older games feel more like a fighting game, and the way the mechanics work is very different than Arise, although I still think Arise kept a lot of the same charm from the previous games. Looking back on it today, I still love the characters, I still love Alphen and Shion's journey, and I still love the combat system. Now, over time, it's easier to pick flaws from games, right? You see a lot more of the flaws as time goes on, and the shiny new combat system wears off after the initial release, but I still can go back on it and have an absolute blast. I love the boost strikes, they're so cinematic and fun. In general, it is just still fun to combo in that game. Yes, I would change a few things about it now, but going forward, I think they could take it and make it really cool and maybe bring some of the staples back from the Tales series, like couch co-op. Tales of Arise will always mean a lot to me. I love the game. No one will ever change my mind on that. And in general, I think it's just a fantastic modern action JRPG.
Back in 2017, Bandai had announced they were working on their next Tales of title, and I was excited. Then in 2019, I remember watching the Xbox show and seeing Tales of Arise finally getting an official announcement, and I was even more excited. The Tales of series is one that is near and dear to me, and so I naturally pre-ordered the game the moment it was available and played it from day one. I expected to love it, sure, but I genuinely didn't expect the chokehold it had and still has on me. The game has its issues and flaws for sure, especially with COVID clearly screwing up its development and having what essentially felt like a whole missing act of the story. But despite that, I still adore the game. I love the story and how it tackles its themes without feeling preachy. I love how the gameplay and exploring feels smooth and dynamic. I love the new skill system. I love the art style, and most importantly, I love the characters and their dynamics. If anything, it's been almost 4 years since I beat the game, and I'm still obsessed with one of the 3 main ships, Dohalim and Kisara. But besides that, I still really do love the cast a lot. The impact of this game on my life might not sound dramatic, but it was, and still is, a comforting piece of media that helped me get through some of the hardest times in my life. It briefly got me back into writing again. It got me to buy the first piece of merch for any series I love. Like, it got me to build an IKEA cabinet so I could have a place for a Dohalim figure. But not just that, it got me talking to more people and engaging with a Discord server for the first time in years, making some new friends in the process. I never expected to love this game as much as I did, and I'm happy it exists. So yeah, 4 years have passed and I still really love Tales of Arise. By this point, I don't think that will ever change.
Hi, I am called Idelic for the most part online, and I was asked to talk about why I love Tales of Arise. And I have been a fan of the Tales series for, I guess, about half my life. I've played a lot of the popular games in the series, like Abyss and Vesperia and Berseria and Symphonia, but Arise just resonated with me in a way that I'd never really experienced before. My brother, who is also a Tales fan, actually kind of joked with me that I had always said that Vesperia was my favorite game, but he said, no, you have not had a favorite Tales game until now. This truly is your favorite. I'm really not exactly sure why this particular game hit me as much as it did, especially since initially I wasn't even going to play it. I wasn't interested in it. I kind of had my nose up about it. I didn't feel like it seemed like a Tales game. But something just jumped out at me about it, I know one thing that happened was I saw JRPG's spoiler-free review of it, and I saw Alphen swimming in the ocean, and that got me really excited because it was the first time in the Tales game that we were actually able to swim, move around in water. In the past, water had just been a barrier. It was just scenery, but for the first time, we could actually move around in it, so it just felt more free, and like there was going to be more ways to explore, and ultimately, yeah, there were. But that's not the thing that I really love the most about it. I know for one thing, the cast has really... I just absolutely love them. I think what it is they just feel pretty much just like regular people, and I think that's a combination of the stellar voice acting, whether you played the game in Japanese or in English. I played it in English, but I just think that the voice acting for the characters is definitely some of the best we've had in the entire series. Not that Tales games have really had bad voice acting, but Arise just really knocked it out of the park for me, and it just gave these characters these really endearing and just kind of down-to-earth personalities that I just really latched onto. Especially Dohalim. I think most people know that I am pretty much obsessed with him, but all of the characters, there's not a character in this game that I don't love. Like, all of them, they're amazing, and I love the found family vibe. Tales always does great with that, and this is no exception. Also, I like the world itself, being more specific, Dana. It's not necessarily the most creative Tales world ever. There's definitely been some with some more inventive design or area designs or more interesting areas in general, but I feel like I connected more with the world this time than I had in the past, and I really became invested in even the more social / political aspects of the game and the story, and I really wanted to see, what happened with this world and just seeing it evolve. And so I was especially happy when Beyond the Dawn came out and kind of offered more world building in terms of how the Danans and Renans would deal with the changes in the world now without the Crown Contest. And I've also just, as a result of playing this game and meeting other fans in the game, I've had some really fun experiences. Things like staying up till 3 in the morning to watch a concert, or staying up with other fans on the Keep the Flame Alive Arise server and waiting for the Beyond the Dawn preludes to drop, or listening to narration from some of the fans about what's going on at Tales Fest, or seeing just all of the fan art, especially from the Japanese Tales fans. Tons and tons of Arise fan art and fan fiction, and even some more unique projects like flower arrangements, or just taking the plushies to some spot and taking pictures with it. Just the different ways that people express their fandom. It's just been a lot of fun to see that. Oftentimes I'd wake up in the morning and see something like that drop, and just those kinds of experiences have just been just a really fun it's just been a really fun few years. I'm kind of sad to see things kind of winding down, but even still, like, coming up on Arise's 5th anniversary. And I know the 4th coming up too, but I'm kind of looking forward to, what are they going to do for the 5th anniversary? I'm hoping they're going to do something special, but we'll see. But yeah, this game really means a lot to me. The message of the game, that's something that means a lot to me too, and I just feel like this one was just really special.
Kaiser has kindly asked me to share what I love about Tales of Arise, or, some memories. And I have a memory, and I have something that I love about it. So let's go with that, and we're going unscripted, baby, so good luck to me. Tales has always been like a pretty modest series, and it grew popularity in relation to the modesty of its budget and its development time and scope very quickly. And it's kind of, where Trails is now. And Tales of Arise is the first big jump forward in terms of visuals and scope, and making it a true international, worldwide series for everyone. Tales of Arise is a massive step forward for the series as a whole, regardless of whether you like it or not. I happen to like it quite a bit. After the honeymoon period, it hasn't landed in my favorite, but it's easily in my top 5. The characters are great. The visuals are just brilliant. After even up to Tales of Berseria being on the exact same PS3 engine since Grace's F, totally unchanged for a very long time. So visually, I think it's a huge step forward, and I think it's a huge step forward in terms of just what it means for the series going forward. I can't wait to see what is next. And my most vivid memory while playing Tales of Arise was just this mind-blowing moment. And please, if you haven't played it, just don't listen to this next bit. The Red Woman, right? The Red Woman is, once that's revealed, who she is, why she's there, and then I remember thinking back, because they sort of allude to her always sort of looking on and observing things. And I remember thinking back and thinking, holy shit, she was there right from the very beginning, right from Bolsef, right from the very first Lord. She was standing there at the podium, and it blew my mind. She had always been there, and I had never questioned it. Not once did I ever question that she was there. I just assumed she was like, a servant or an attendant or whatever of the Lords. They all dress that way, kind of like the Star Wars Red Guard things. It just blew out when that was revealed, and I thought back and thought, holy shit, she was there the entire time. I stopped playing the game, I stood up and paced around the house for 10 minutes. It just completely blew my mind. And that's probably the fondest memory I have of it. It was just that mind-blowing realization. So yeah, I mean, Tales of Arise means a lot to me. It means a lot to me in terms of Tales being my favorite series, just because I know we're in for even bigger and better things coming up. And as I said before, I can't wait to see what's next for Tales. Thanks, Kaiser.
Thank you again for enjoying this very long and ambitious retrospective for this game. Just like with the Scar Nexus one, this was also months in the planning, and I feel like this was the perfect opportunity to revisit this game again for one last time. As all you guys know, Tales of Arise is truly special to me. I hope you all enjoyed it, and anyone new out there that probably ducked because of spoilers, I do apologize for that once again, and I hope this gives you a chance to play the game out now. It's currently out for dirt cheap at the time of this video, on any platform except Switch, sadly, and as said, it also has a free demo that you can try if you're curious on how it plays to the full game. And for those who either liked the game or not, I hope you still enjoyed this video regardless. That said, thank you guys so much for watching, and Mad Kaiser